When I first saw the um, early trailers for Logan with uh, the random driving and Xavier in the back seat, I was hoping on some level for a sort of cinematic successor to uh, Patrick Stewart's wonderful series Blunt Talk. While he is suitably dimensional in this movie to give a bit of that dynamic with his uh, hirsute chauffeur Logan, um, a flavor that's closer to the floor is that of what would essentially be Dos Equis, the movie, you know? And I suppose that is somewhat appropriate. With Weapon X and Professor X, there are at least two prominent X's in this movie. Um, I do love how they portray the extent to which Logan is a truly broken man by making him an Uber driver. Um, but anyway, a big part of the plot um, revolves around Wolvie's attempts to protect a much younger lady clone from a slightly younger evil clone. Like, that dude does tend to get involved in a lot of stories that are based in some nefarious organization's attempts to make its own version of him. You know? Like Sabretooth, uh, Laura, Deadpool. Um, but isn't that like a big part of what happened to the entire comic book industry in the 90s? You know, it seemed as though every company was trying to make uh, its own easily marketable equivalent of Wolverine. You know, like Cougar, uh, Blood Wolf, like Lobo. Um, I mean, one could probably make a case for the old John Paul Batman too. You know, Azrael. Um, I remember my first experience with that guy. It had nothing to do with any of that. I was on a trip to the old family cottage, and I saw this golden armored version of Batman in the store, um, and and I had to have it. You know, like at the time I was very obsessed with Batman, and this figure um, seemed to correct one of Batman's primary deficiencies, that of shininess. And that's still an obsession for me, if you haven't noticed. Well, I mean, it's more of a way of life, actually. But yeah, he looked great in his golden shiny armor with the uh, edgy cape that seemed to have more of an upward definition. Uh, yeah, it was almost like a vampiric sort of thing. It worked out really well. Um, and but later I would learn that this John Paul Valley character was actually designed to correct a different deficiency in uh, Batman, that of Bruce Wayne's abstention from murder, which he doesn't share with Wolverine. So but you know what? I think that murder is somewhat easier to forgive when the vigilante in question is so ridiculously shiny. But something that is slightly harder to forgive is the missed opportunity of Richard E. Grant in this movie. Um, all right, I remember the end of X-Men Apocalypse. Um, the genetic material for um, Laura uh, that had been stolen from Wolverine somehow was briefly shown uh, in relation to Nathaniel Essex, the immortal Mr. Sinister. And this movie decided to take that in a different direction. There were no explicit ties to Mr. Sinister. That's fine. They wanted to do their own thing. I understand that. I mean, it wouldn't have been my personal preference, but it's fine. Whatever. But I always thought that Richard E. Grant would be an ideal Mr. Sinister. Um, but they used him in this movie. They wasted him on a role that probably isn't Mr. Sinister. Although they could probably go back in another movie and say, "Oh, he was disguised," and that'd be pretty awesome. Um, it's I didn't actually realize that Richard E. Grant was in this movie. I was watching it. I briefly thought, "Oh, that guy almost looks like Richard E. Grant. Hey, Richard E. Grant would make an awesome Mr. Sinister." And then I realized that he was in this movie. Um, but yeah, I mean, I haven't really felt like this since Ben Kingsley was cast to play a Marvel villain who wasn't the Vulture. Um, but yeah, it's like were the producers of Logan um, or the holders of the cinematic X-Men franchise holding out for Alan Rickman? Like they realize that he's dead, don't they?